My brother raised his glass at our parents' anniversary party, smirked at the room, and said, "Let's drink to my sister, who's 30 and still living off our parents like a freeloading roommate." Everyone laughed, except his best friend, a high-ranking military official, who froze the moment I quietly rolled back my sleeve to check my watch. His eyes locked onto the faint surgical scar near my wrist, the distinctive crest on my signet ring, and the exact timestamp of an encrypted file on my phone. His face drained of color. Without a word, he excused himself to the hallway and made an urgent phone call. Exactly 15 minutes later, heavy boots echoed on the porch, and a firm, authoritative knock rattled the front door. The entire room fell silent. My brother thought he was exposing my failures. He had no idea he'd just exposed his own downfall. "My name is Audrey Cooper, and I'm 30 years old." To anyone looking at me from the outside, I was the quiet, unremarked daughter who had moved back into her parents' modest suburban house 6 months ago. I wore faded denim, kept my hair pulled back, and spent most of my hours staring at an encrypted laptop screen in the spare bedroom. My family assumed I was lost, struggling, and clinging to my parents for basic survival. The dining room was filled with 30 guests for my parents' 30th wedding anniversary. Wine glasses clinked, laughter echoed, and my older brother, Brandon, stood at the head of the table. Tall, impeccably dressed, and radiating unearned confidence, he soaked in the attention. He tapped his fork against his crystal glass, drawing every eye to him. "I'd like to make a toast," Brandon announced, his voice carrying effortlessly across the room. He looked around the table, letting a cruel smirk settle on his face before his eyes locked onto me. "To my wonderful parents, and to my 30-year-old sister, Audrey, who is still living off them like a freeloading roommate while the rest of us actually contribute to society." A ripple of nervous, uncomfortable laughter washed through the room. My mother gasped softly, clutching her napkin while my father lowered his eyes. Brandon beamed, thoroughly enjoying the moment. I didn't flinch, cry, or offer a defensive argument. I simply sat straight, held my glass, and let his words hang in the air. Among the guests watching Brandon's pathetic display was his closest friend, Colonel Marcus Vance. Marcus sat directly across from me, looking polished in his formal uniform. He was a rising officer in high-level military logistics, sharp-eyed and trained to read a room in seconds. While the other guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, Marcus remained motionless, his brow slightly furrowed as he watched me. I didn't utter a word to Brandon. Instead, I calmly reached for my water glass. As I lifted my left arm, the cuff of my linen shirt slid back a few inches. The movement revealed two distinct details: a faint, precise surgical scar near my wrist, the mark of a tactical recovery operation, and a heavy, dull silver signet ring bearing a classified military intelligence crest. Marcus's eyes dropped to my wrist, and in an instant, his entire posture rigidified. His breath caught in his throat. He recognized the crest immediately. It belonged to an elite division of U.S. Army intelligence, the kind of field-grade officers who managed high-risk strategic assets, not unemployed dependents hiding in a spare bedroom. Marcus looked up, his face drained of color as he met my calm gaze. He glanced at Brandon, who was still grinning arrogantly at the head of the table, completely oblivious to what was happening. Without saying a word to anyone, Marcus quietly pushed his chair back, stood up, and stepped out of the dining room toward the quiet hallway to make an urgent verification call. Exactly 15 minutes passed after Marcus slipped into the hallway. The dining room had returned to a buzz of casual chatter, though Brandon was still coasting on the high of his condescending toast, leaning back in his chair like a king reviewing his court. Then 3 heavy, deliberate thuds echoed from the front door. The sound cut straight through the ambient chatter, sharp and authoritative enough to make my mother drop her silver fork against her plate. "I'll get it," Brandon muttered, rolling his eyes as he stood up. Probably some lost delivery driver ruining the evening. He sauntered into the foyer, his posture relaxed and arrogant. But as he pulled the heavy wooden door open, the casual smirk vanished from his face. Standing on the porch were 4 individuals, 2 local police officers in full uniform standing guard, flanked by 2 sharp-looking military investigators wearing crisp dress uniforms and carrying official leather binders. "Can I help you?" Brandon asked, his tone laced with annoyance. "We're in the middle of a private family event. If this is about a noise complaint, you're mistaken." The lead investigator didn't answer Brandon's question. He didn't even look at him. Stepping right past my brother into the foyer, his heavy boots sounding loudly against the hardwood floor, the officer scanned the dining room until his eyes locked onto me. Brandon scoffed, trailing behind them. "If you're here for my sister Audrey, she doesn't have any money to pay whatever fines you're serving. She lives here off our parents." The lead investigator stopped right at the edge of the dining room table. He brought his right hand up into a crisp, immaculate salute. "Major Cooper," he said, his voice firm and unmistakable. "We've secured the perimeter and executed the federal warrant as requested." The dining room descended into absolute silence. My mother's eyes widened in shock, and Brandon stood frozen, his mouth open in disbelief as he looked between the saluting officer and me. "Major?" Brandon spat out, trying to force a chuckle that sounded hollow and desperate. "What is this? A joke? She's a failure who sleeps in our guest room." The lead investigator didn't break eye contact with me. He unzipped his leather folder and laid a stack of official red-stamped documents directly onto the center of the dining table right next to the anniversary cake. "6 months ago," I said calmly, standing up from my seat, "I didn't move back home because I needed a place to stay. I moved back on official assignment after detecting severe financial anomalies attached to my parents' identity during a routine clearance audit." I gestured toward the documents. "For the past 3 years, Brandon, you've been systematically siphoning funds from Mom and Dad's retirement accounts. You forged Dad's signature to place a fraudulent lien against this very house to cover the mounting debts from your failed real estate firm." My father let out a choked breath, his hands shaking as he reached for the paper on top. It was an official forensic audit detailing over $400,000 in unauthorized transfers, all traced directly to Brandon's personal offshore accounts. My freeloading in the spare bedroom had actually been a covert 6-month military intelligence operation to trace every single cent he stole and secure the legal proof required to seize his assets and buy back my parents' home under my clear title. The dining room descended into absolute chaos. My mother placed her trembling hands over her face, tears running down her cheeks, as the full weight of Brandon's betrayal hit her. My father sat paralyzed, staring at the precise bank statements that laid out 3 years of calculated, systematic theft. "This is a mistake," Brandon yelled, his voice cracking with sudden panic as he gestured wildly at the officers. "She fabricated those. She's trying to frame me because she's jealous of my success. Mom, Dad, you know me. You know I'd never do this to you." "We know the truth now, Brandon," my father said, his voice quiet but heavier than lead. He held up a copy of his forged signature on the home mortgage application. "You didn't just take our money, you were going to leave us homeless." The guests sitting around the table looked away in disgust, unable to meet Brandon's eyes. The man who had spent the entire evening boasting about his career and insulting his sister was now exposed as a criminal standing in his parents' dining room. I walked around the table, standing directly across from him. "Every dollar you took from Mom and Dad has been tracked, frozen, and recovered," I said, my tone cold and steady. "I paid off the hidden lien on this house yesterday with my own funds. The house belongs entirely to them again, and you have nowhere left to run." Brandon's smug composure completely disintegrated. His face turned pale, sweat broke out on his forehead, and his knees visibly shook as the brutal legal reality of grand larceny finally caught up with him. The lead investigator stepped forward and signaled to the uniformed officers standing by the foyer. "Brandon Cooper, you are under arrest for wire fraud, grand larceny, and financial exploitation of the elderly," the officer announced, pulling Brandon's arms behind his back and snapping cold metal handcuffs around his wrists. Brandon didn't offer any resistance. All the arrogance that had defined him just 20 minutes earlier was entirely gone, replaced by silent, terrified compliance as he was led out the front door into the waiting police cruiser. Colonel Marcus Vance walked back into the dining room, looking deeply apologetic as he approached my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Cooper, I am so sorry you had to experience this tonight," Marcus said softly. "The Military Intelligence Board has already validated Major Cooper's audit. Every asset Brandon attempted to liquidate will be formally restored to you." I stepped up to my parents' side and placed a thick blue folder on the table in front of them. Inside were the freshly notarized deeds to the house, the fully restored balances of their retirement accounts, and a certified release showing 0 remaining debt. My mother wiped her tears and pulled me into a tight embrace, while my father held my hand, unable to put his gratitude into words. The house was quiet now, saved from total ruin, and the brother who tried to destroy us was finally going to face the full weight of the law. In the end, silence and patience proved far more powerful than loud insults. I didn't need to shout over the dining room table or defend my character against Brandon's arrogance. I simply let time, truth, and preparation do the work for me. Protecting my parents and securing their future was the only mission that truly mattered, and no amount of public humiliation could ever shake my resolve. Today, my parents live peacefully in their fully restored home, free from debt and the shadow of betrayal. As for me, I continue my service as an Army major in intelligence logistics, knowing that true strength never needs to brag or seek validation from those who only look at the surface. Now, I'm curious about your thoughts on how this unfolded. What would you have done if you were in my shoes at that dinner table? Have you ever dealt with a family member who tried to tear you down for their own gain? Drop a comment below and share the city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the globe. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next story on the screen.